Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How do you convince an entire country that hundreds of innocent people have been wrongly convicted of a crime, and worse still, a crime that never even took place, and all because of some boring old accounting software? On one side, you've got a 350-year-old organisation, the UK's largest retail network, a British institution, part of the fabric of society, Britain's most trusted brand. And it's telling national newspapers and broadcasters that your story is simply not true. On the other side, you've got a small specialist technology magazine, Computer Weekly, and its team of journalists are being told by this huge corporation, the Post Office, insisting that there are no flaws in its software, and we know that has to be a lie. I'm Bryan Glick. I'm the editor-in-chief of Computer Weekly, the magazine that exposed the Post Office scandal, the UK's most widespread miscarriage of justice in our history. Thank you. And I'm here because I want to tell you how to avoid becoming the next Post Office scandal. Now, like so many public scandals, this one was created by a perfect storm of events. And arguably, if any one of those events hadn't taken place, this scandal may never have happened. As such, it's easy for some to say this was a one-off, that nothing like this could happen today. Think again. The technology flaws that underpinned this scandal were easy to understand once they were exposed. It's one thing to ask questions when computer says no, but what happens when AI says no and nobody even understands what questions to ask? Now, this is my entry into the competition for the most boring opening slide at South by Southwest London this week. If you've never seen one before, this is what an Act of Parliament looks like. This is what our country runs on. There have been thousands of these Acts of Parliament passed into law over the last few centuries of Parliament in the UK. What's so important about this one? Why have I put this one up here? Well, as you probably know, in the UK, we have a separation of powers. We have the executive and the judiciary. The government passes laws, and the courts uphold and enforce those laws. This particular Act of Parliament, which was passed in May last year, the snappily titled Post Office Horizon System Offences Act 2024, is quite unique. It's the first time in the long history of the mother of parliaments that the government specifically legislated to overturn a decision of a criminal court. Not just one decision, in fact, over 900 decisions. And to this day, we still don't know exactly how many victims there have been of this particular scandal. Many have chosen not to come forward. Some, sadly, had died long before we reached this point. So what I'd like to do is just take you on a little bit of time travel to take you back to where all this started, to try and understand a bit more about how it started, and more importantly, to try and draw out what I think are the very real lessons still applicable for organisations and businesses today. Now, I'm sure many of you recognise this image. For some of you, this may have been the first time you found out about the Post Office scandal. For some of you, this may be the reason you've ended up coming along here today. This, of course, is from the primetime TV drama Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. When this was broadcast on 1st of January last year, for everyone involved in the scandal, everything changed, literally overnight. I can't tell you how many times I had conversations with my team at Computer Weekly over the preceding 15 years saying to each other, why is this not leading the BBC 10 o'clock news? Why is this not on the front page of every national newspaper? Thanks to that TV drama, after 1st of January last year, it was, and still is today. But this came 25 years after the software that underpinned this scandal, the Horizon software, was started to be rolled out. It came 15 years after Computer Weekly first wrote about the scandal and first exposed it. But finally, it meant that the whole country shared the outrage that fueled the journalism behind more than 500 stories that we published since that first one in 2009. Just 10 days after this programme went out, the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced that the government was going to legislate to overturn all those convictions. And that's what led to that Act of Parliament you just saw. Now that TV series would never have happened without this. Chances are also that because of that TV series, you probably recognise the chap on the left there. That's Alan Bates, now Sir Alan Bates, the lead campaigner for the Post Office scandal, the man who has done more than anybody else to expose this scandal and to bring it to where we are today. He's standing there next to some of his legal team. The chap next to him is a chap called James Hartley from Freeth's Solicitors, very much one of the unsung heroes of the Post Office scandal. Along with many others, especially on the legal side, who supported all the victims. Now, Alan, the picture of Alan here is taken outside the High Court in London in December 2019. It was taken by Computer Weekly's chief reporter, Carl Flinders, who wrote the vast majority of those 500 stories over the last 15 years. And in this picture, Alan is talking to the press after he and his fellow victims of the Post Office scandal had proved conclusively in a court of law that the Horizon software was responsible for their so-called financial shortfalls. This was the moment that at last the British establishment was finally forced to sit up and take notice. Now this is the front cover of the 12th of May 2009 issue of Computer Weekly. This was the issue where we first wrote about the Post Office scandal. Here's that very first article that we wrote all that time ago. In this article, we revealed the stories of 7 Post Office branch managers accused of stealing money from their branches. They had variously been sacked, convicted, prosecuted. Some had gone to jail for it. Some of them are near household names now. There were characters in the TV drama. Alan Bates himself, Lee Castleton, pictured right there, Joe Hamilton. Names that many of you will perhaps recognise now if you watch that TV series. When we talked to them, every one of them told exactly the same story. They all said that everything had been fine in their post office, and then suddenly these phantom shortfalls started happening very soon after the introduction of their Horizon accounting software. Every one of them had gone to the post office to say, I think there's a problem with the software. Every one of them had been told, it can't be a problem with the software because you're the only person saying you're having these problems. On 12th of May 2009, they all found out for the first time that was a lie. Now that article was written by a young journalist called Rebecca Thompson. Rebecca left Computer Weekly about a year or so after that and went on and still has a very successful career as a journalist writing about the retail and fashion industries. Imagine what it's like being Rebecca 15 years after that story was written, and she finds herself being portrayed as a character in the most watched TV drama of the decade at the start of last year. And then at the end of last year, finds out she's being awarded an OBE for services to justice. Sometimes it is true that good things come to those who wait. Now, I said at the start that this all happened because of a perfect storm, and this is my somewhat feeble attempt to illustrate a perfect storm. As a journalist, I'm very much the one about the words, not the images, so forgive me for that. But this whole sorry story, you can actually trace it back 30 years, 1995. Every good story starts in the same place as it finishes. I showed the finish earlier on with an Act of Parliament last year. This one started with an Act of Parliament in 1995. Now, this was the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and in 1995, the Law Commission opened a consultation into changes to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. One of the things it was examining was how courts treat computer-based evidence. In 1995, just imagine, businesses were in the first phase of being automated and computerized, so were big government departments, and increasingly in court cases now, computer-based evidence was being used. And every time you took computer-based evidence to the court before this, you had to prove the veracity of that evidence. It was hugely time-consuming, it was slowing down lots of cases. So the Law Commission did a consultation on reversing the burden of proof, Should we instead assume that computer-based evidence is accurate unless you can prove otherwise? Now, lots of organisations contributed to that consultation and lobbied around it. One organisation in particular lobbied very, very hard to support this change in the law. Can you guess who that might have been? Why would the Post Office, of all organisations, be lobbying for a change in the law about how digital evidence is treated in courts? Think about it. In 1995, the Post Office was basically a cash business. No contactless payments, no chip and PIN cards. It was cash and cheques. That was it. But the Post Office is one, and still today, is one of a very small number of sort of quasi or former government organisations that has the power to privately bring criminal prosecutions. That means it can collect evidence, accuse somebody of breaking the law, and take them to court and prosecute them for it without any checks and balances at all. No involvement from the Crown Prosecution Service or anybody like that at all. So for the Post Office, they believed that in this cash business, because they had that, or the reason they had these private prosecution powers was because there were a few bad apples among the branch networks. There were a few people who did trouser a bit of cash here and there, and they had the powers to bring that against them. But at Post Office HQ, they believed that this was rife, and they just couldn't prove it. All of these were manually accounted businesses. So why was that relevant to them in terms of computer-based evidence? Well, in 1996, they signed a contract called Pathway with the supplier ICL, then the flagship of the British technology industry, owned by the Japanese supplier Fujitsu. Pathway was at the time the biggest government IT project ever. It was going to automate the benefits, or automate the payment of benefits. Benefit claimants were going to be given this whizzy new technology called a smart card. They take it into a post office, hand it over, and they get their benefits back. The post office, therefore, had to be automated, and this was part of doing it. By 1999, that project was a disaster. It was the biggest government IT cock-up ever at that time. The benefits agency withdrew. They wanted nothing more to do with it. The post office wanted to continue. They still wanted to automate the post office. ICL, the supplier, was forced to take a £180 million hit against its revenues, an enormous amount at that time. But with a nod and a wink behind the scenes, the government promised that Fujitsu would get the revised deal to complete the automation at the post office branches. They couldn't call it Pathway anymore. The name had become toxic. So it was renamed Horizon. By this time, Horizon was a geopolitical issue. The British Embassy in Tokyo warned Tony Blair, as Prime Minister, there would be serious economic repercussions from Japan if Fujitsu had its contract cancelled. However, as a Fujitsu whistleblower told us in 2021, the software was, and I quote him exactly, a bag of shit. And everybody knew it. Even Tony Blair knew it. The software quality problems were escalated as far as him, but the Prime Minister, who famously admitted that he didn't even know how to turn a computer on, was advised by those around him to continue with the project. In 1999, the rollout of Horizon began. Coincidentally or not, 1999 was also the year in which the changes to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act came into force. Fujitsu, meanwhile, was planning a £5 billion flotation of ICL that was due to take place in 2000. It would have been the biggest tech flotation in the London stock market history. There was no way anyone at the supplier was going to admit to problems in the software. Corners were cut, testing was cut back on. So imagine Post Office HQ in London when Horizon started showing large numbers of post office branches with financial shortfalls. What do you think happened? Did they think, that's odd, perhaps we should investigate whether there's something wrong with the software here? No, of course. That toxic culture of distrust towards sub-postmasters in their own branches, combined with the unwarranted confidence in the software, and with the gift given to them by the changes in the law around computer-based evidence, meant that post office executives looked around the room, looked at each other, and simply said, at last, we've got the thieving bastards. Now, this was 25 years ago. As I say, you may think, yeah, this could never happen again. But I think there are some very real lessons that can be learned from the post office scandal that are absolutely 100% relevant to organisations today, especially as we're coming into what is going to be a new age of change with the development of artificial intelligence. So I want to pick out 5 particular learning points that come out from this that I think are relevant to everybody here today. First one is to question your culture. The complexity of today's technologies can induce confirmation bias at all levels of an organisation. The computer said yes. As I said earlier, it's one thing to question when the computer says no, but what happens when AI says no and nobody knows what questions to ask? As in the post office, that risks turning that sort of weak governance into a toxic culture. Nurture your internal expertise. As I say, you're running your organizations on increasingly complex technology. Do you know how and when to question what it's doing? And do you have the in-house skills to even find out? Now, today you'll see a lot of people still saying, why is the post office still using Horizons? They should just throw it out. Why are they still dealing with Fujitsu? They should just throw them out. Horizon is the post office. If you switch off Horizon, you switch off the post office. If you take out Fujitsu, you take out all the skills that exist that know about how to run Horizon. Outsourcing your core competencies and your customer experience in this way can lead to executive blindness as to the true state of your organization. Value the right people. Head office bureaucrats at the post office neglected their most important people, the sub-postmasters in those branches. If you're a customer of the post office, when you think of the post office, you don't think of a big corporate office block in London. You think of the friendly sub-postmaster that you go in and buy your stamps from or ask to deliver your parcels. They are the post office to most of all of us. They're the people at the front line of the core customer experience. Now, the former Post Office Chief Executive, Paula Venables, in her carefully controlled and somewhat tearful evidence to the Post Office inquiry last year, concluded at the end of her testimony that maybe, with hindsight, perhaps she might have prioritised the institution over the individual a little too much. You don't say, Paula. Perhaps you did. It's essential that you understand who in your organization matters to your customers, especially when technology is increasingly driving that customer experience. Technology is not a panacea. It cannot be stated often enough that technology is a tool, not a solution, not a total solution to your business problems. Using AI to automate a bad or inefficient process simply creates a faster bad process, and most likely one without any humans in the loop to control it. IT can turbocharge your performance, or it can destroy the most trusted brands. It's people who make the difference, and even more so in the AI age. Bring everyone with you on your tech and AI journey. Most post office branch workers didn't understand the technology, and they were poorly supported. Tech and AI can still be overwhelming and scary, even for today's digital generation of employees and customers. If you're a leader of an organization, you must bring everyone along on this journey of AI and technology. Now, we still have a long way to go in the digital revolution that's going to transform our society, our culture, our lives, our economies in ways that we don't even yet know. The post office scandal amply demonstrates the bad things that can happen if we don't consider the unforeseen consequences of technology-driven change. Is this you? Can you honestly say that your organization learns these lessons and puts them into practice? If it's not, then I've got to tell you today, you are very much at risk in this emerging age of AI of becoming the next and the turbocharged post office scandal. Please don't. Thank you.